Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 14th of March, 2025, just after 1 o'clock, and welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. Joining me today in the studio is Patrick Henningsen. Welcome to the programme, Patrick.
Great to be with you, Mike.
And by video link, we have Mark Anderson. Now, later in the programme, we're going to be covering the NHS England closure, and James Roguski will be joining us to discuss vaccines and so on. But we're going to begin with the response from Russia to the suggestion of a ceasefire. Yesterday, Putin was meeting with President Alexander Lukashenko, who's, of course, the president of Belarus, and he was Putin was answering questions from the media about the ceasefire plan presented by the US and Ukraine, and he agreed in principle, but perhaps not in the specifics. So let's have a look at what he said here. We are also in favor of it, but there are nuances. The idea itself is right. So in other words, there should be peace. Well, we think everybody agrees on that. But he went on to say this. He said, I think we must talk them over with our American colleagues and partners, perhaps have a telephone conversation with President Trump and discuss them with him. These are the plans. We agree with the proposals to cease hostilities, proceed from the assumption that the cessation should lead to long-term peace and eliminate the root causes of the crisis. We also want to guarantees that that during the 30-day ceasefire, Ukraine will not conduct mobilization and not train soldiers and will not receive weapons. And he pointed out that Russian troops are currently advancing along the entire 2,000-kilometer front line of the war with Ukraine, and halting military action would disrupt ongoing operations. And he said that Ukrainian forces could use a ceasefire period to regroup, receive more weapons, train fresh recruits. And so he said, so how would these 30 days be used? For forced mobilization to continue in Ukraine, for more weapons to be supplied there, for retraining the mobilized units, or would none of this be done? And this is a good point, Patrick. The West has formed here because of the Minsk agreements, as you talked about before, being a stalling tactic for war preparations. And of course, we have Odessa and the 100-year pact.
Well, quite right, Mike. And that's another sort of thing that people aren't paying attention to. Before Joe Biden left office, before Trump was sworn in, you had this 100-year deal signed between Britain and Zelensky. And that was Biden and the globalists and NATO giving the nod, basically, to Starmer, saying, go ahead and put that one in there as a placeholder. So you have special boat services, SBS, sending their teams in to occupy 8 ports around Odessa. They're clearly digging in for some sort of, operation or to defend that city, because everybody knows, Mike, once Odessa falls, that's the end of NATO's southern flank. It's all over. You might as well close up the organization at that point, no matter what you put in Romania. We'll get on to Romania in a minute, Mike. But you know what's interesting about this is, and we'll see Keir Starmer's statement on this, this deal was designed to fail. This is like they asked the Israelis for advice on how to do negotiations, because this is a typical Israeli job, which is, it's a perfectly good deal and the ball's in your court. They've all tweeted out this slogan, Mike, if you noticed, the ball's in Russia's court, the ball's Ursula von der Leyen, Starmer even released it, Rubio, they all said the same thing, all the influencers on Twitter. So this is a total Israeli style negotiations. We've offered Russia a perfectly good deal. So they're treating Russia like Hamas. It's the same thing. We've offered Hamas a perfectly good deal, but they've rejected it. So what more can we do? And so what does this mean? Sanctions stay in place. Aid to Ukraine stays in place. The money keeps flowing. The intelligence sharing continues. Basically, this is the same as Biden. There's no material change from Joe Biden in Ukraine to Trump in Ukraine. So we are back to default war of attrition. Status quo. Keep the war going.
So let's have a look at what Keir Starmer had to say yesterday.
And that's why everything that we're doing in relation to Ukraine is so important. And you've seen the developments in the recent weeks, developments this week going on even today, because I profoundly believe that if we don't secure a just peace and a lasting peace, then that insecurity, which we've already felt, will continue. And that means higher prices, higher bills, The cost of living crisis going on for even longer. If you like, a chokehold on our future, which will be much, much harder for us to tackle. And look, we know some basics. Putin's appetite for conflict and for chaos is already there, and it will only grow. And Russia is already menacing our skies, our waters, our streets, and our national security. And that's why I believe the fundamental task of politics right now is to take the tough decisions on security. And that's why we raised our defence spending, which we also need to use as an opportunity to renew our communities.
So you notice there he said, our skies, our waters, our streets. Well, he's keeping banging on the Skripal drum there. You know, Russia carried out a chemical weapons attack on the streets of the UK. This is the narrative that keeps coming from the British government.
When was that? It's a dubious event, to say the least, and we don't want to get into it, although you've published some great articles and reportage on this. But there's something else about that very quickly, Mike. There was a drone attack on Moscow just a couple of days ago. Massive drone attack hitting civilians in Russia. Who's behind that drone attack? Was it just Zelensky, or was it another NATO country that was involved in doing that to sabotage the negotiations? So menacing the streets of Russia, not military targets, civilian targets. What is Russia supposed to do? Oh, and by the way, one of those attacks was on a pipeline monitoring station that monitors the pipeline flow into Hungary and Slovakia, two dissenting European Union and NATO members.
What a coincidence.
Isn't that interesting? I don't suppose any chicanery is going on behind the scenes. It's totally above board.
Right. And in the meantime, Maria Zakharova was tearing strips off the leaders of EU NATO countries in her press briefing for continuing to demand the escalation and bloodshed in Ukraine. We regret to observe, she said, that some political forces in Europe continue to hinder the emerging process that could lead to resolution in the future. So she said the words peace and settlement might seem to upset them because their main goal is evidently to provoke escalation and violence. And I think, Patrick, she is absolutely right. She finished by reiterating the Russian position on NATO boots in the ground, saying that for them, foreign troops, foreign bases, or so-called peacekeeping missions in Ukraine is unacceptable, and that any such thing would end up with them leading a response. And, you know, they're very clear about that. That is a red line. But, you know, we keep pushing up against their red lines constantly and then blaming them for it when we cross them.
And there's no definitive statements there about NATO membership or the territory in the Donbass, for instance. So it's a non-starter.
Right.
From start to finish, the whole thing is a non-starter.
But you mentioned the ball is in their court thing, which of course is an example of rapid response mechanism in action. But what's been going on in Romania?
I wish I had shown those tweets on screen. Maybe we can do that next week. But the rapid response mechanism, that's also familiar. I remember that. We'll bring this up on screen right now. So Romania's online content removal policy, empowering or overreaching? Obviously, a generous rhetorical question there. Let's take a look at this. Romania's National Authority for Administration and Regulation in Communications has basically put, we'll bring this back, has basically put a new simulation exercise, which is testing a rapid response system of information control aimed at swiftly identifying and removing illegal or, quote, inauthentic content from social media, particularly in light of the controversies surrounding Romania's recent presidential elections. They canceled the presidential election results, and they basically tried to ban the front-running candidate, Kailan Georgiou here. And they go on, and this is where it gets interesting here. This initiative takes its root from the rapid response mechanism, which ironically was established during the G7 summit in June 2018, meant to enhance cooperation among nations in addressing, quote, crisis moments and perceived threats to Western democracy.
And who brought it in?
That would have been Prime Minister Theresa May.
That is correct.
Who introduced this. So this is extremely worrying on so many different levels. And we did a bit more digging into this, Mike, and this Here we go. This is the call for proposals from the European Commission, dated October 24th, 2024. This is in advance of the Romanian presidential elections here. And so this is kind of like a tender for contracts. And we have identified the company who has the contract. We'll talk more about that next week. We'll have more information on this. And this goes incredibly deep. This is real-time censorship of social media, Mike. So in order to defend our democracy, this is being run in Romania, and this could go throughout the EU. And by the way, they did a beta test on this during the recent elections in Germany to test the concept. So was there real-time censorship in the German elections just now? According to this, yes. So
how is that not election interference?
Well, one thing is for sure, we're going to get out in front of the March 27th rollout of this. We'll be giving you plenty of information before they go live. We'll be going live with what it's all about. So that'll be interesting.
Now, of course, one way to deal with messages that you don't like is to censor and censor algorithmically. Another way might be just to kill the journalists. Now, of course, we don't know that what happened to Jamie White in the United States was a censorship effort, but nonetheless, he was a target.
He was a target. We'll bring him up on screen. This is Jamie White. He's 36 years old, a reporter for Infowars.com. He was murdered earlier this week, and it's according to his family, this was a robbery of some sort in an apartment complex after he came home from work in a parking lot in Austin, Texas. I know the area very well myself, so I'm very familiar with this town and these types of settings. This is very disturbing. He was only 36 years old or so, 36, 37. Very nice young man, very popular. Very hardworking. So, one of us in terms of independent media journalists. So it's really disturbing. So we'll bring that back up on screen for a moment here, and we'll go here. And so the coverage basically on this, it has been pretty friendly, I would say, the coverage. But the thing is, he also appeared on one of these Ukrainian hit lists. And there's a number of these Ukrainian hit lists which have been listing journalists in America or anybody with a dissenting opinion on Ukraine, basically. There's the Moravets, the Peacemakers, which a lot of people know about, but there's a few others. And it turns out the funding of these is quite interesting, being funded by the National Endowment for Democracy, USAID, and so forth.
That would be the organization that just had its funding reinstated.
Yeah, that would be. Yes, indeed. So this is something Jamie had tweeted out over the summer. I'm on an Ukrainian enemies list due to my work at Infowars with Alex Jones on the Ukraine proxy war. I mean, just saying proxy war will get you on that list. And the group who compiled this list is tied to and funded by the U.S. State Department, USAID, CIA, and George Soros, Open Society Foundation. So, and again, we checked the data on that. And yes, there's Jamie White. He is definitely on this list, but it's not Moravets. We did a little bit of digging. And to my surprise, Mike, I found out that this was another list, which is called Texty. Okay, this is USAID funded. Elon Musk, as you can see, J.D. Vance at the bottom there. He's also on this list. It's got 391 individuals and 100 and something odd organizations, many of them media organizations, many names that are familiar to you and I. So we did a little bit of a search on here just to Tulsi Gabbard. She's on this list as well. The current director of national intelligence, texty.org.ua. This is funded. And you can see the heat maps like Kate Starbird. Do you remember this sort of stuff when it came out in 2016, where they map individual journalists, connect them to political parties? This is basically a very nefarious operation. This is the United States deep state who are outsourcing this work to Ukraine using U.S. tax funder money here. And there it is, far-right website, Infowars, and its editor, Alex Jones, and many others. So it lists all of Alex's journalists on here, including Jamie White and others, and calls them enemies of Ukraine. Now, they've had to backpedal on this organization because they've gotten so much pushback, okay? And Gray Zone just did a story on this recently, but we actually had reported on this back in June, Mike, and we basically said they put Daniel McAdams, Ron Paul, and 21st Century Wire on this same list. And so Daniel wrote a great piece for the Ron Paul Institute on this, which you can find up at 21stcenturywire.com. And there they are, Daniel McAdams, Ron Paul. And of course, there's my website, 21st Century Wire. They're listed in there, as well as myself. And by the way, in very good company with some very good pundits and journalists here. But look at that. This is a doxing operation. And what's interesting about this, Mike, is that there's more than one of these. This one's funded by USAID, okay, and the National Endowment for Democracy. But it's not the only one. There are more nefarious ones that are connected with this as well. So we'll go and maybe if we have more time, but this one is called Molfar, okay? This is particularly nasty, this one. It doxes individuals, posts their personal details on the dark web, we're told. I have not had access to the level of doxing on this, but this is one of those, again, you can see the Times, PBS, Reuters, they're affiliated with mainstream media organizations. And we've done a little research on this. Enemies of Ukraine, foreign propagandists, AKA journalists. This is an open source type thing here. So this is, really kind of dangerous in a certain way, Mike, because of the fact is disclosing people's names, where they live, personal details, and it's funded by the U.S. government, but it's outsourced to Ukraine. And our investigation has found that a lot of these are functioning as money laundering outlets. These are money laundering outlets. They're using U.S. and Western cash and then feeding this information to Western journalists in the mainstream media or activists who want to harass or target people who are on these blacklists, let's say. So this is just one of those here. I'm on this one as well, as a number of other journalists and people as well. So the Gray Zone did a good expose on this recently, which was done, I forgot which journalist did that. You can see USAID. They're very proud of that affiliation. Even after the whole scandal, they still haven't removed that from their website. So it's just incredible. So you can just see the funding there. It's unbelievable, Mike. So this is basically where things are at on this. So, it's there's too many of these going, and they haven't been taken down. And what kind of message does this send in terms of the West?
Well, it's clearly intended to have a chilling effect on people that are speaking out, for sure. But Molfar, by the way, runs an OSINT training program, which is available on some of the online platforms, sort of training skills platforms. It's appallingly bad, I have to say, but nonetheless, they clearly have people working for them that are able to troll this data and expose it, as you say.
I think it reminds me of Bellingcat as well.
Yes.
Similar funding channels, similar kind of attitude, very belligerent, and no respect for rights and norms in Western, democracies, so to speak. So
yes. Okay. Well, look, let's move on to health matters and welcome Mark to the program. Mark, let's talk vaccines and discuss that with James Roguski.
Thanks, gentlemen. Good day to you. Good day to the viewers. Yes, my guest today is James Roguski. I'll sort of be the sub-host right now. A little less than a year ago, James and I both gave some input to the Health and Human Services as they were gathering public comment about the international health regulations and related matters. That was a little less than a year ago. I've known Jim and about his very fine work for at least 2 years. But welcome, Jim. I think you've been working at these matters, the regs and the treaty, for the better part of 3 years or even longer, correct?
Correct. And thanks again for having me.
Yeah, I've got the clicker, by the way, just a quick comment. But I got 4 slides today, and let's go through those. And this one here, this is just a start. You've got a letter to President Trump dated early March and a letter to the new Secretary of Health and Human Services, RFK Jr. I'm just pointing out that through your Substack website that viewers can, from any country, anywhere in the world, really, can read your letters to them and use it as a model or a guidepost for writing their own correspondence. In a couple of minutes, we'll show how to contact President Trump on these matters. Of course, you can write to your members of Congress and anyone else that you see fit. But Jim, you can outline the website addresses on that. But go ahead and walk us through. I've got a couple slides coming up. I'll show in just a minute of the actual physical effects of mRNA injections. One is a photo of a Pfizer effect, and the other is a Moderna outcome. Both pretty grisly, that's for sure. And they weren't the worst ones. But go ahead and walk us through your latest posting and the activism that you're recommending, and some of those mRNA, tragic physical outcomes that happened.
Thank you. Well, the root of this, all actually goes back well before Thanksgiving of last year, where I realized that when I was doing searches online, and not just using Google, but alternative, search engines and such, it was becoming harder and harder to find the information that I knew existed out there. And so I went looking around to see if anybody had put together a compendium of, all of the many things that I know and you folks have reported on, and, many others, that these things were just gradually, maybe not disappearing from the internet, but being pushed so far down on any kind of a search result that they were, for all intents, invisible. And so I started asking people, where do you go to get information about, quite frankly, the history of, at this point, COVID, of the jabs and the harms? And, so many things had disappeared off the internet. They've even disappeared off of archive.org. So I put them all together on one, website where I ran a series of 27 articles, and it's all available for everyone at notsafeandnoteffective.com. I had just gotten, tired. I'd heard one too many times, oh, the jabs are safe and effective, safe and effective. No, they're not. But if you bury the information, and one of the key pieces of the information is that with the WHO, they have a coding system, the ICD-10 codes, where one of the codes that probably nobody on the planet is aware of is U12.9, which is the code that doctors are supposed to use when someone shows up at their office with a vaccine injury, or unfortunately, if they're filling out a death certificate, a death due to a vaccine. And so what I realized was, with all of this information, when I dug into some of the gory and gruesome photos that are in the letter to Donald Trump, I realized that, yes, I've seen these things, but these things don't make it to mainstream media. They don't make it to alternative media. They're gruesome and gory. And these images are not some TikTok video. They're not, somebody's claim. These are case studies that are published in well-respected journals. They can all be found on PubMed. It's part of the United States database of information, and nobody freaking seems to care. Now, I'm not saying that people don't care, but because most people don't even know these things exist. So I figured that for President Trump, I put together some pictures. I think he could understand 40 photographs of the harm that has been caused by the result of Operation Warp Speed. This is due to his initial action with Operation Warp Speed to ram through essentially a biological weapon to be inflicted upon Americans. Now, for the Kennedy letter, it's a bit longer. It's got a lot more detail, and it's all information that, again, is available from Pfizer, from Moderna, from the FDA, from the CDC, from all of the various National Institutes of Health and all of the databases that we have, the VAERS reports. And when you see that, very specifically what I put together for Kennedy was in relationship to children, because number one, there never, ever was a risk for children, certainly under 12 or any teenagers. The risk was inconsequential. So all of the risk benefit ratio from these injections is 100% risk. Well, when you have 30 or 40 reports of death of children, where none of them were ever going to die from COVID. They are clearly been murdered by the jabs that were rammed through. And here's the real kicker, okay? The real kicker is these are not safe and effective. No one can say that these products are safe and effective because they are not FDA approved. They went through the PrEP Act and the emergency use authorization pathway. They're only legally allowed to say that they may be effective. Well, with the PrEP Act and the way the governance structure is in the United States, it doesn't matter. If people in the United States and around the world are wondering why, everything occurred the way it did, it's because the PrEP Act, by a declaration made by the Secretary of Health and Human Services, gives everyone immunity from prosecution. It doesn't matter if you accidentally injected the wrong person with the wrong jab. It doesn't matter if you inject a child even though they don't have their mother's or father's consent. It doesn't matter if you inject someone in a rest home who's unaware of their circumstances. It doesn't matter that all of these harmful results occur. Everyone has immunity from prosecution. And that is the biological warfare under which we've been operating for the last 5 years.
Thank you for that, James. A very thorough explanation. And let's go on and show a couple of these results. And this is psoriasis flare-up associated with a second dose of Pfizer BioNTech through PubMed, and NIH is in that web address there. And of course, these links will be posted in the show notes most likely. But go ahead and comment on that one very briefly, Jim, and I'll show another one in just a moment.
I believe I included 40 images, and some of them are unbelievably gruesome, but there are thousands more. And so I took a smattering of them. Essentially, thousands upon thousands of people, have suffered similar impact. But ask yourself, how often do you go to your doctor and your doctor says, "Oh my goodness, I'm going to write this up in a journal. This is worthy of a case study." So obviously, these are the worst of the worst, but they're right there in the letter to President Trump, because pictures speak 1,000 words. Whether it's all body inflammation, many of the people ended up with necrotic tissue, dead, dying, black, gangrenous tissue. These are not for the squeamish, but it also is needed. These are just swelling on a man's torso. These are not for the squeamish, but you also need to shock people into an awareness, because why in the world would anyone walking around town, unaware, not reading medical journals, not digging, not searching for this stuff, ever have any idea? People say, "Oh, it's safe and effective. It's safe and effective." The millions, if not billions, of people around the world who have been harmed by not just Pfizer and Moderna, but AstraZeneca and J&J and all the other jabs, and not to mention remdesivir and everything else. These people cannot be forgotten. Yes, we're 5 years on and we're 4 years on into the jab. And now they're talking about hundreds of other jabs, for everything else under the sun, as if the jabs for COVID were safe and effective, which they most certainly were not.
And here's one other image. Let's get that other image up there. And this is a bullous drug eruption, that one there, from this one from Moderna. I picked out one Pfizer and one Moderna. That's the side of somebody's hip, just above the buttocks and the upper leg there. And just to give one more example there, quite shocking. And as you say, these are not doctored, these are official, no hanky-panky with the photos, but you had to dig for them to show people the reality. And so it's obviously not just death from injection, as bad as that is, but also these tremendous side effects and outbreaks. But anyway, there's one other slide there with the contact info for Donald Trump. And this this will also be available through the show notes, but there's Truth Social and other links to get a hold of Donald Trump. One more time, James, on that website, that one-stop shop that people can go to read more about this and get involved. What was that again?
It's very simple. It's notsafeandnoteffective.com.
Okay, thank you, James, for a most enlightening and in-depth explanation of what's going on.
Thanks for having me.
Sorry, thank you, James. Thank you, Mark. Okay, let's move on then to NHS England. And well, here he is, Keir Starmer. He was giving this speech yesterday. He's announced the end of NHS England. So let's have a look at how NHS England fits into the NHS bureaucracy. So basically what we have is the Department of Health and Social Care at the top, funneling money into NHS England, who funnels money into local integrated health boards and then into the various service providers. But basically those service providers might be dentists, GPs, and pharmacies, hospitals, district nurses, and so on. On the other side of the coin, money flows from DHSC into local authorities, and then also into slightly different service providers. In this case, social care, as well as healthy lifestyle programs, and so on. Now, NHS England is a Quango. A Quango, for those who don't know, is a quasi-autonomous non-governmental agency. There are more than 300 of these across the United Kingdom. Anyway, we'll come on to why that's significant in a second. But Wes Streeting then, yesterday in the House of Commons, said this: we inherited an NHS going through the worst crisis in history. So there's no time to waste. We inherited public finances with a £22 billion black hole, so there's no money to waste. Well, maybe if they stopped wasting it on Ukraine, that wouldn't be such a problem. But anyway, he went on to say, today the NHS delivers worse care for patients, but more expensive than ever before. The budget for NHS England staff and admin alone has soared to £2 billion. Taxpayers are paying more, but getting less. Work has already begun to strip out the duplication between the two organisations and bring many of NHS England's functions into the department, that's the Department of Health. Now, in the meantime, that was in the morning then. Keir Starmer was on his travels. We've seen a little bit of what he had to say already, but let's see what he said on this particular topic.
Politicians almost not trusting themselves, outsourcing everything to different bodies because things have happened along the way, to a point where you can't get things done. And I accept that all parties have done a bit of this, including the Labour Party. And therefore today's got to be a line in the sand for all of us. But I also think that in government there was a clear moment when the Tories crossed the Rubicon. It was early and it was decisive. And it sent a signal across Whitehall that was never undone. So today I'm going to reverse it, because I don't see why decisions about £200 billion of taxpayer money on something as fundamental to our security as the NHS should be taken by an arm's length body, NHS England. And I can't, in all honesty, explain to the British people why they should spend their money on two layers of bureaucracy. That money could and should be spent on nurses, doctors, operation, GP appointments. So today I can announce we're going to cut bureaucracy across the state, focus government on the priorities of working people, shift money to the front line. So I'm bringing management of the NHS back into democratic control by abolishing the arm's length body NHS England. That will put the NHS back at the heart of government where it belongs, freeing it to focus on patients, less bureaucracy, with more money for nurses, an NHS refocused on cutting waiting times at your hospital.
So if you're listening carefully to that, you'll understand the point I'm about to make. But so, because the question is, what is this all about? Is it about the 8,000 unfilled doctors' posts and 27,000 nursing vacancies? Or is it about NHS waiting lists or A&E waiting lists or ambulance response times? Probably not. because he says he's going to cut bureaucracy right across the state. Those were his words. I'm going to cut bureaucracy right across the state. Where have we heard this before? It's fascinating to watch as some kinds of policies are rolled out on both sides of the Atlantic at exactly the same time. First, Starmer announces the building of data centers to run massive AI systems. And why? In order, he said, to provide personalized cancer care. And then a week later, Larry Ellison announces that the new Trump regime will launch Operation Stargate to build data centers to run massive AI systems in order to provide personalized cancer care. And then we have Elon Musk in the United States running his Doge operation to cut bureaucracy right across the federal government. And just a few weeks later, Starmer's announcing exactly the same policy, with NHS England as the first to fall. And I've got to ask, is this a coincidence? Could it be that Starmer has looked at Doge and said, well, that looks popular, let's do that? Or is it that actually there's something else going on, something else which is happening at a deeper level of the state, which is deciding that certain policies need to be implemented on both sides of the Atlantic? And my main question is this actually about reorienting things more onto a war footing?
I think he wants to give the look of Doge, Mike. He wants to give the Doge vibe, but no real Doging going on. What I think you've nailed it, Mike. This is also about creating that militarization of healthcare or vaccine rollouts, mRNA, boutique, customized vaccines like they did with Operation Warp Speed in England and Europe as well. That was a military operation during that period. So that looks like what it is. And behind that, big corporations. So what? Softening up the public for the next part of the conversation later, which is, well, we think that privatization might be more efficient in some of these areas. So this is a constant bait and switch exercise with the NHS. Let's face it, this is the most emotional central issue in the country for everybody, because everybody is involved or dependent on it or connected with it in some way, shape, or form.
Yes.
So it becomes a political tool in a way, and a political football from administration or government to government. But the long range, Mike, trend is privatization. That's what we've seen over the years. So is that reversing? Has Keir Starmer made a pledge that the NHS will not be or never be privatized? I'm not hearing that part of the conversation.
If you're intending to privatize something, the first thing you do is to strip out all the fat, because that makes it more attractive. So, but anyway, we'll keep you posted on this. If you like what the UK Column does, you'd like to support us, support.ukcolumn.org is the place to go. There are various options. You can make a donation, join as a member of the community, and that, of course, gives you access to UK Column News Extra that'll follow this programme. Other ways to support us would be pick something up at the UK Column shop or from clive2carl.com. But if you can't do any of that, then please share the material that you find on the various platforms, but particularly from ukcolumn.org. There's lots of content going up on that website on a regular basis. The share links are in the content. Now, of course, we have an event coming up. Let's watch a quick advertisement for that.
Dictator, UK Column. This is an advert. Morals are for vegans. I'm a steak man. Okay, Doomers. Newsflash. On 5th of April, UK Column, that debauched band of reprobates, are hosting a conference for fellow truthers and shakers in Cheltenham called On Location. Speakers will be a rogues gallery of experts that the government still hasn't killed yet, on topics ranging from the WEF ate my homework to how's a loser guy in 10 stages of paranoia. There will also be an exclusive evening event where plebs can't come in, where you can hobnob eating a corn on the cob, gobbing off on how to hobble the UN, using a doorknob-shaped key fob to break into the Secretary General's office, to rob the COVID files, to dob them all in, leaving them sobbing and mobbed. Amusingly enough, given the theme is deep state thrombosis, the conference will take place next to GCHQ, and we're in the midst of a battle of counter-surveillance in escalating measures. Of course, there is a gulf in budget between us and them, so the methods have varied. They sent an agent provocateur in agent provocateur to seduce our top guy, get the deepest, darkest secrets of the biz, whilst we sent someone in a pantomime cow costume right into their lobby to see how far they could get. They bugged our entire venue with the most cutting-edge equipment and have all the details down to the width of the seat screws, whilst we sent one elderly pigeon flying over their roof and managed to find out that Jim the security guard likes tea. That was a coup. So, in the end, we thought, to hell with it. Let them know. Let them know. And we're going ahead with it. And we'd like you to join us. Be there or be scared. I'm Dictator, and you're all idiots.
Thank you, Dick. Thank you very much for that. Everybody needs to be there. Patrick will be speaking, of course. Catherine Gunn, Raja Mia, and Alex Thompson. Brian Garish speaking. We will all be there to have offline discussions as well. So please get there if you possibly can. Now, quickly, a mention of the interview that went out yesterday, Unmasking Autism with Sinead Murphy, is on the website at the moment. If you didn't see it yesterday, please have a look at it. And a reminder that that Sunday, March the 16th, we have Supporting Farmers for Food Security Symposium in Cheltenham, and Charles Mallet, Sandy Adams will be taking part in that. So if you can get along to that one, please do. Okay, let's move on then. And where do we go now? Trump and Rutte, because Mark Rutte, the Secretary General of NATO, was visiting Washington.
Yeah, he is. This is the successor, the heir apparent to Jan Stoltenberg here. And so the question is, Mike, of course, what is this? Is this anything but NATO appeasement? They like to use that word appeasement a lot these days about Putin's aggression, taking territory in Europe and the sovereign rules-based international order. And so here's Rutte with Trump, and no protesting against anything that Trump is saying, which is absolutely bombastic. Watch this discussion.
So when it comes to Greenland, yes or not joining the US, I would leave that outside for me, this discussion, because I don't want to drag NATO in that. But
we're going to have to make a deal on that. And Denmark is not able to do that. You know, Denmark's very far away and really has nothing to do. What happens? A boat landed there 200 years ago or something, and they say they have rights to it. I don't know if that's true. I don't think it is, actually. You know, we have a couple of bases on Greenland already, and we have quite a few soldiers, and maybe you'll see more and more soldiers go there. I don't know. What do you think about that, Pete? So, don't answer that, Pete. Don't answer that question. But we have bases, and we have quite a few soldiers on Greenland. As a state, it would be one of the great states anyway. This would be the most incredible country visually. If you look at a map, they drew an artificial line right through it between Canada and the U.S., just a straight artificial line. Somebody did it a long time ago, many, many decades ago, and makes no sense. It's so perfect as a great and cherished state. Keeping "O Canada," the national anthem. I love it. I think it's great. Keep it. But it'll be for the state, one of our greatest states. Maybe our greatest state. But there'll be a little disruption, but it won't be very long. But they need us. We really don't need them. And we have to do this. I'm sorry. We have to do this, yes.
He says, we don't need Canada. They need us. Then why are you annexing it if you don't need it? So, I mean, it's just totally insane. Like, and Mark Rutte just stood there in his suit and just basically said nothing really substantial. So, I mean, it's just kind of ridiculous.
Is that because it was basically impossible to respond to?
You can't, yeah, obviously you can't object to the king while you're sitting in his court, right? I think King Abdullah from Jordan learned that lesson the hard way. Zelensky tried.
Certainly did.
He tried. So it really makes a mockery of NATO. It makes a mockery of international law, Canadian sovereignty. Canada's a NATO member, and so is Denmark. So nothing to say from the NATO Secretary General. So he's doing his job.
Okay, well, we're going to have a NATO-related aspect to the next item, which is all about Bilderberg. Mark, bring us up to date.
Well, good day, gentlemen, once again. Thanks again to James Roguski. Basically, moving along here, I'm doing some clicking on my end. I wrote a news brief, and the main part is in yellow. The chief negotiator for Sweden's accession to NATO, Oscar Stenström, who officially took part in the 2023 Bilderberg Conference in Lisbon and at last year's conference in Madrid, reportedly is helping to organize the 2025 summit in Stockholm on behalf of billionaire Marcus Wallenberg. Wallenberg, of course, owns the majestic Grand Hotel in Stockholm, where the meeting, by all indications, will be held. It's not ultra official, of course, until the obscure Bilderberg Meetings media department announces it, but that's very late in the game. The Guardian did run an article on Christmas Day just this past December, which probably didn't get much play, all but confirming that it'll take place in Stockholm. So that's the going knowledge right now. We'll move forward from there, and we're going to cover a little more than just the meeting. The meeting will come, of course, soon enough. And moving on here, the part in red is another little news brief that I wrote here. The Trump administration has previously claimed it wants to reduce America's military presence on the European continent, and exercises in Sweden are also reportedly expected to be affected by the decision. This matter is all but certain to be a hot official or unofficial Bilderberg topic this year in Stockholm, although NATO is always a general topic and has been for a long time, simply NATO, just that one word on the official Bilderberg topics list. And from there, we're branching out a little bit. This is a picture of Oscar Stenstrom for the Oscar Stenstrom, get that right. This is a picture of him with Magdalena Anderson, the PM of Sweden at the time, in Lisbon in 2023. This Swedish NATO negotiator is left off the Bilderberg list, but he gets in anyway. So he's an unofficial person who's been there the last 2 years. That's fairly commonly known now that the Bilderberg attendees list is by no means complete, something always to keep in mind. And now, again, we'll branch out some more. And this is the Nordic Times, which is doing some pretty good work lately. Concerns over Bilderberg executives' influence on Trump, and that's, of course, Peter Thiel. And the Trump administration has quite a few Thiel associates, people that have been involved in Palantir and other companies. Of course, Thiel helped found Palantir, and Palantir is run by Alex Karp, who is a Bilderberg regular now, a perennial there, and he's on the steering committee. And moving on from there, I noted here that tech mogul and multi-billionaire Peter Thiel wields significant influence over President Trump's administration, and Bloomberg brought out a brand new review on this, saying that at least 15, I counted 16, representatives in the new U.S. administration have clear ties to the Palantir founder, Mr. Thiel, who, unlike Elon Musk, prefers to keep a low profile. So going on from there, we have the picture of the cover page of the Bloomberg investigation. Now, I inserted the lettering in yellow and green up at the top from the Bilderberg Steering Committee currently, not former, but currently. Peter Thiel is still on the steering committee. So is Marcus Wallenberg, who's kind of overseeing this year's conference, and Alex Karp, very involved in Ukraine logistics and things like that, high technology in Ukraine, of course, leading Palantir that Thiel co-founded. Now, of these 16 people closely associated with Thiel in the Trump administration, I listed what I felt were the 8 top ones. And let's just go through those real quick. I'm calling it the Thiel 16. That's my own name. Clark Miner, former Palantir software engineer, now the chief information officer at the Department of Health and Human Services. So he's a couple notches below Kennedy. Colin Carroll, formerly of Anduril, which is another non-traditional defense contractor, kind of like Palantir, doing deals with the Pentagon. He's now chief of staff to the deputy secretary of defense, again, a pretty high position, chief of staff to the deputy defense secretary. And a Gregory Barbacia, formerly with Palantir and Elements. Elements is a reference to Palantir itself, as I understand it. He's now chief information officer at the Office of Management and Budget. Again, a rather high office for these privateers. And we'll move on from there. Jacob Hellberg, he's now Undersecretary of State for Trump for Economic Growth, Energy, and the Environment. He's married to a Keith Raboy, an early PayPal executive and former general partner at the Thiel-initiated Founders Fund. He was senior advisor to Palantir CEO Alex Karp on national security and a fellow at the Palantir Foundation. Of course, J.D. Vance himself, vice president of the U.S. He saw Thiel speak at Yale Law School back in 2011 and later joined Thiel's Mithril Capital. Thiel became a mentor and bankrolled Vance's Ohio Senate run with a record $15 million. And in 2021, as word has it, Thiel brought Vance to Mar-a-Lago to patch up his relationship with Trump. And I've got just a couple more, three more, in fact. Barbacea ended up in there twice, so excuse me on that. Let me go down to Jim O'Neill. He's now the Deputy Secretary of Department of Health and Human Services. He served in roles at Education and the Health and Human Services departments. He's been in government before. He joined Thiel's Clarion Capital in 2008. And in 2010, he co-founded the Thiel Fellowship. And last but not least, a Michael Obadal, nominated in March to be the Army's #2 civilian official at Anduril, the defense contractor. He worked on next generation command and control projects with the Army, and he's a 27-year Army officer. So these are the well-connected, that is, Thiel-connected people in the current Trump government. You guys are talking about the privatization of government services on both sides of the pond, and this seems to fit that pattern. And I got a couple of things that are sort of a cherry on top. It turns out that Jens Stoltenberg has stepped down from the co-chair of the Bilderberg Steering Committee, and the Bilderberg Group announced that. I didn't happen to get that same email. Usually I get a number of their emails. That one I did not get. People can check out the source I listed there in the show notes if they want to know more about it. And the last item is almost comic relief. And we have, we're talking about Canada. Well, Trump is actually sounding serious that he wants to absorb Canada. Well, Canada has got what amounts to a new Bilderberg government. As we know, the Canadian Prime Minister is now Mark Carney, a longtime banker, formerly on the Bilderberg Steering Committee. He attended Bilderberg in 2018 as the governor of the Bank of England. And in 2022, 2023, and 2024 under Brookfield Asset Management, under that banner. And Chrystia Freeland, his so-called opponent to be PM, attended Bilderberg the last 2 years as Canada's deputy prime minister, and it's supposed that she still holds alongside Carney. So basically, the prime minister and the deputy prime minister of Canada are both, in essence, Bilderbergers. So that's an interesting optic, you might say, for Trump wanting to absorb Canada. Now Canada's becoming more under open Bilderberg control, although their Bilderberg affiliations, of course, are not the whole story, but it's a curious alignment of the stars, that's for sure. But anyway, that's the latest on Bilderberg. I've got a couple of Bilderberg articles posted on the UKC website that explain a lot more of their meddlings and connections in AI and in big media. So back to you guys.
Thanks, Mark. And we should not forget that if we want to add another name to Peter Thiel network list, that would be Nigel Farage.
Oh, really? Are they?
Absolutely, they are best buddies. Yes, so apparently, so there we go. Now let's move on then. And what's Tulsi up to?
Well, not so much, but this is an incredible story. Bring this up on screen. So Tulsi Gabbard had already selected a deputy for the Director of National Intelligence, DNI. And his name is Daniel Davis. A lot of people might know him as Colonel Daniel Davis. He has a very successful podcast, which is on YouTube. He's also a senior fellow at Defense Priorities. This is a think tank in Washington, generally known in that kind of Douglas McGregor vein of a pretty good, straight-talking, common-sense guy. A decorated combat veteran, which is rare in Washington to find such people in politics, very experienced, and has kind of been on the right side of most issues over the years. And something happened, Mike. He was basically appointed, and all of a sudden the appointment was scuttled a couple of days later. And it turns out it was because he wasn't hawkish enough, we're told, on the issue of, guess what?
Israel.
Yes,
Gaza,
Israel. He's not supportive of Israel,
yes.
Not hawkish enough against Iran.
Right.
So this is what we've understood. And there was a campaign run. We'll bring this up on screen here. The ADL was involved in basically smearing Daniel Davis. So the Anti-Defamation League involved in defamation. Interesting, isn't it? And then you had top Fox hosts like Mark Levin, here he's up on stage, basically doing victory laps afterwards after lobbying. So all these influencers like Laura Loomer and all these like MAGA Zionist pro-Israeli influencers all piled in and went after Daniel Davis in what is clearly a coordinated attack. So this is incredible. So they've managed to basically veto a top pick for intelligence, the Israeli lobby, and all these influencers, and they put pressure on Trump and the White House, and work through social media. Unbelievable. So this is incredible. So that's not foreign interference. That's not foreign meddling in the U.S. government. Of course, that's what Russia does, right?
Right.
We're told. So anyway, I think it's important that people will bring his show up on screen here. The best thing we can do at this point is to support Daniel Davis and go visit his YouTube channel, Daniel Davis Deep Dive. It is absolutely one of the best shows online, like Judge Napolitano. I think even better than some of these other programs, quite frankly. But it's incredible that he nearly got the job, and that would have been such a great thing. But what does it show you, Mike? Why would Israel want to keep someone like this out of a job where they're curating intelligence? And we talked about this on this program in previous weeks. And that's because there is an agenda to wage war and to do a preemptive strike on Iran. And where's the intelligence coming from for that?
Israel.
It's coming from Israel. So will Tulsi Gabbard be compelled to act on what, quote, credible threat intelligence about something Iran is supposed to do? And if not, who would be there to check that? Could be someone like Colonel Daniel Davis to offer a second opinion on that. That's basically what Tulsi probably selected him to do. And sure enough, the Israeli lobby got wind and scuppered the whole thing. So it's unbelievable. And it makes me worry that something is coming down the pipeline. There's an agenda to confront Iran militarily in Washington and in Tel Aviv. And this is a big red flag, Mike.
So 2 questions. Any suggestion about who might be put in place as an alternative? And the other is, does this say anything about Tulsi's chances for staying in the role?
Two good questions, Mike. And I will say that Eldridge Colby, who is another person who is up for a high national security post to be the president's advisor, that's been stalled. And the rumor is because he is not pro-Israel enough. Okay, that's one of them. And then the hostage envoy, Trump's hostage envoy, who is talking to Hamas, I think he's been sacked. And he's Jewish, by the way. So he wasn't, because he was being too friendly to Hamas and not giving enough deference to Netanyahu, apparently. So he's been kicked out. So who's running U.S. foreign policy?
It's pretty clear.
Is it Trump or is it somebody else? Is it Miriam Adelson? Is it the Israeli lobby? Is it Benjamin Netanyahu? So if Benjamin Netanyahu is having the final veto on U.S. foreign policy and military affairs, then who's the president of the United States? Really?
Very good question. I suspect it's Elon Musk.
Oof. Well, let's bring this up on screen here, Mike. And there's this thing called the conflict of interest. So Musk just pledges to dump $100 million into a MAGA super PAC. Trump's not even running.
Now, for the British audience, you better just mention quickly what a PAC and a super PAC is.
Well, super PAC is because of legislation. Super PAC is where people can put an unlimited amount in a super PAC, and the super PAC can donate that to a candidate. Individuals couldn't do that, but if you go through this thing called a super PAC, it makes it all legal, basically. So this is basically buying democracy. Corporations and oligarchs can buy candidates through super PACs. It's all legal,
right,
in our democracy, right? So what does Trump do? He's promoting Tesla here in this video. You can see Elon's got his child there as the human shield against any media criticism. He's such a good family man. He's got lots of wives, mothers, and children, so he's a big family guy. But Trump's promoting Tesla here while getting a bung of $100 million. I mean, does this not look good? Imagine if this was George Soros doing this with
Biden, Kamala or something.
Yeah, or Alex Soros's company is getting plugged by Biden, and then Alex Soros drops $100 million into a Biden super PAC. What would the right be doing? They'd be screaming bloody murder on Fox News. But for some reason, for a lot of people, this is okay. I can't afford to drop 100 mil. So I guess I don't have access. Do you have 100 mil? None of us do. So we don't have access to democracy in the same way that some people do. Is that fair? Is that a meritocracy? What is this exactly? Or is it a plutocracy? This is the question.
Very good questions. We'll talk much more about this and the other things we'll be talking about on the news today in Extra in a few minutes. If you're a UK Column member, stick around on the live stream and you can watch. If you're not a UK Column member, maybe you'd like to join. Do pick up tickets for the April event if you can. But we're going to leave it there for today. I would say thank you very much to Mark and to Patrick and to James Roguski for joining us today. Have a great weekend and we'll see you on Monday as usual. Bye-bye.